The story told about the Madeleine McCann case might just be a facade. Behind it, there are documents, decisions, and backroom dealings that never saw the light of day. Today, you'll see what was kept silent for over a decade and understand why this truth still unsettles so many people. Not every curtain closes to protect. Sometimes it just hides. In the McCann case, the stage was carefully set. The interviews, the pleas, the photos, everything seemed perfectly aligned. But those paying close attention noticed something. There was always a part of the story no one touched. A detail that slipped through the words, but was there, right in the middle of the silence. On the night Madeleine disappeared, the questions were many, but the answers didn't come with the same clarity. On the contrary, over time, the accounts changed. The time Kate supposedly checked on the children shifted. The sequence of events too. And instead of clarifications, softer, less precise versions emerged. The strangest part? No one seemed bothered by this. The media embraced the couple. The authorities treated the contradictions as understandable human errors. But what if they weren't? What if these adjustments, these long pauses, these averted glances, were actually clues to what's behind the curtain? There are moments when what's said matters less than what's avoided. And in the McCann case, what was avoided all these years might say more than any press conference. When everyone focuses on the pain, almost no one notices the silence. And that's where the truth often hides. While the world repeated, "Poor parents," a portion of the public wondered, why isn't anyone talking about what doesn't add up in the statements? Why were certain names protected? Why didn't anyone pull at the loose threads? The McCann's pain was real, yes, but using pain as a shield shouldn't have stopped a fair investigation. And that's the wound that never healed. The feeling that some truths were ignored for comfort, not for lack of evidence. Today we're going to lift that curtain, not to accuse, but to look directly at what was set aside, because there are questions that were never answered. And maybe after today, you'll start to see what no one else had the courage to ask. If you're ready, as you come with me, picture the scene, a press conference, flashes, a trembling voice, hard stares. Kate clutches a teddy bear, Jerry beside her, with a jaw too firm for someone who just lost a daughter. On the surface, it's a tragedy. But there, something feels off. It's not the pain, because no one has the right to measure a parent's grief. It's the script, the steadiness of their gestures, the absence of hesitation, the confidence in their words. We believe she's alive and will be found. It sounds beautiful. It sounds right, but it sounds rehearsed. Early in the case, the McCanns delivered a precise image to the world. Desperate but composed parents. But just 1 week later, small cracks started to appear. Subtle changes in their statements. Uncertainties about basic details, like the exact time of the last check on the kids, who was where, and what was or wasn't noticed. This wouldn't be so odd, except for how the media, instead of questioning, embraced it. They protected the couple's image. They turned grief into a campaign. And with the force of heartfelt headlines, they erased any question that strayed from the script. They lost a daughter. How dare you suspect them? But what if the discomfort isn't in accusing, but in asking what wasn't allowed to be asked? Not everything shown to the public is the truth. Sometimes, what looks like a stage is just a set, and the real story continues silently backstage, hidden behind a curtain. Let's go to the details no one likes to remember. In her first statement, Kate said she checked on Madeleine at 10 p.m. She noticed the window open and the girl gone. But a day later, small changes appeared in this account. Was the window unlocked or already open? Was the blanket folded or crumpled? A detail that once seemed clear now sounded vague, and it wasn't just her. Jerry also altered details in later statements. He said he checked the kids around 9:05 p.m., but the declared time didn't match witnesses, or the babysitter's records, or the dynamics of the dinner with friends. And this is where the conflict begins. It's not the inconsistency itself. It's the pattern of how these contradictions were received. Because in any other case, shifting statements would prompt a reopening, a reassessment, a cross-examination of evidence. But here, they became footnotes. The right questions were asked by a few, and quickly smothered by emotional headlines, reports reinforcing the parents' suffering, and a general atmosphere of "don't touch this wound." The media became the guardian of the narrative, and that doesn't happen by accident. There's a difference between protecting to preserve a public image. And while the world's eyes were fixed on the stage, what happened behind the curtain stayed locked away, untouchable. Untouchable not for lack of clues, but for lack of will to pull back the fabric. Silence became armor. And every time someone dared lift a corner, the same phrase came: they've already suffered enough. But what hurts more, knowing the truth or pretending we already know everything? Was it pain that silenced the McCanns, or the fear of what would be revealed if they said too much? Because not all silence is empty. Some are hiding places with locks on the inside. And when you start noticing the details that were forgotten, the question is no longer why the curtain was closed, but who benefited from keeping it that way. When the curtain starts to shift, the air changes. It's as if someone locked the air in a room for years, and now finally a crack lets it escape. And in that crack, what you see isn't pretty. The McCanns, so protected by their public image, made choices that don't align with the expected desperation of grieving parents. Do you know one of their first actions after Madeleine's disappearance? Hiring a professional press spokesperson, before requesting a review of security footage, before questioning details of the investigation. Meanwhile, a legal battalion was mobilized to monitor newspapers, blogs, TV channels. Anyone who hinted at the parents' responsibility was quickly sued, not countered with arguments, but silenced with fear. Protection that didn't come from the police, it came from the courts. Now think with me, why shield something so fiercely if there's nothing to hide? These decisions created a minefield around the truth. While the world saw a suffering family, the backstage was organized to keep a single narrative standing, and anything that threatened that version was tossed behind the curtain. Neighbors' statements were disregarded. A resort employee who claimed to have seen something odd that night was never re-interviewed. Even contradictions in the timelines declared by the McCanns themselves were ignored, not explained, not confronted, ignored. The media, instead of investigating, protected. It's not that everyone knew, it's that everyone knew how far they could go. And that's where things get darker. Because we're not just talking about personal pain. We're talking about a system that, when faced with power, chooses who deserves to be questioned and who should be spared. The curtain didn't fall on its own. It was held up by many hands. The truth always gives signs before appearing whole, and one of the clearest signs in this case was the McCanns' emotional behavior. In interviews, Kate rarely showed anger or desperation. The pain that appeared was restrained, choreographed, as if every word had been internally reviewed before being spoken. Jerry, meanwhile, took on public speaking with a strange confidence. He gave lectures, wrote articles, represented the cause at conferences, as if his daughter's tragedy had been absorbed too quickly or repackaged to fit an institutional narrative. I'm not saying this proves anything, but the absence of naturalness betrays discomfort, and that discomfort deepens when we recall the questions that were never answered. For example, why weren't the clothes Kate wore that night analyzed immediately? Why did sniffer dogs detect the scent of a cadaver in the car rented by the parents weeks later, and this was treated as a coincidence? Why did they refuse to answer dozens of questions from the Portuguese police citing legal advice? Why was there no full reconstruction of the night of the disappearance involving everyone, including the dinner friends? And more seriously, why were most of these contradictions simply ignored? The answer isn't in a conspiracy theory. It's in a term few like to face: selective justice. When someone has enough power, be it political, financial, or symbolic, the weight of questions changes. Some are asked forcefully, others stifled before they're even born. Nietzsche said the most dangerous lie isn't the one shouted, it's the one embedded in silence. And in this case, the silence was well decorated. It gained microphones, solidarity, and emotional headlines. But beneath it all, there was something no one wanted to face. Maybe because, if they did, the truth would shatter the image built with such care. It's strange how some truths only hurt when they fall into silence, isn't it? And maybe the scariest part is this: when everyone agrees not to see, the truth doesn't disappear. It just changes places and hides behind the curtain. The silence that seemed harmless now unsettles, not as an absence of sound, but as the presence of something unsaid. After everything you've seen so far, it might be clear. The problem was never a lack of answers. It was contradictory versions, legal silence, and media shielding side by side. The picture that forms isn't one of protected innocence. It's one of preserved convenience. The curtain we've talked about was never there by accident. It wasn't placed to hide pain. It was used to protect a version. A simplified story with a beginning, middle, and a convenient lack of an end. A story the parents themselves helped shape with coldly calculated decisions. Remember the car rented by the McCanns weeks after the disappearance? Remember the sniffer dogs that detected the scent of a cadaver in the trunk? The excuse that it was the smell of spoiled food? Or the questions from the Portuguese police that Kate refused to answer? Now you understand, it wasn't just the system that failed. It was a collective choice of where to look and where to look away. At some point, justice stopped being a search and became a spectacle. And those who control the stage control what the audience feels. This is where many people turn off the video, because knowing this is uncomfortable. It forces us to admit that it wasn't just the police who stayed silent, not just the lawyers, not just the press. We chose silence too, because doubting someone who's crying feels cruel, because raising suspicion against devastated parents feels insensitive, because the truth, when it escapes the pretty version, becomes a mirror. And there are things we'd rather not see reflected. But now that the curtain has shifted, even just a little, you've seen, and that changes everything. Because silence, once broken, no longer fits in the same place. So what do we do with what we've seen? This might be the hardest part, because contrary to what many think, the truth doesn't free you quickly. It unsettles, it hurts. It forces us to face that, behind empathy, there can also be calculation, and that not every tear is a witness. Sometimes it's a disguise, but we're not talking about condemning anyone. We're talking about making space for what never had space. The simplest gesture, pulling the curtain, might seem small, but it's symbolic. It's the opposite of accepting. You don't need to leave this video with certainty, but you need to leave with a question. What if what the McCANNS hid isn't a crime, but rather a discomfort that would unravel everything we believe about them? About justice? About how we choose who's trustworthy and who deserves to be investigated? I didn't come here to give you answers, but I also didn't come to give you peace. Because this case isn't about peace. It's about a void that was never filled, and that perhaps was widened by those claiming to seek justice. The silence was too comfortable for too long. And now, after everything we've seen together, the final question isn't, who did this? It's, why did they stop asking? And if it were you, hearing all this, seeing all this, and deciding whether to pull the curtain or not, the curtain is still standing. But maybe, just maybe, it's starting to give way. The noise doesn't come from outside. It comes from the snap of the fabric stitches, tearing from within. And you, who stayed until now, know exactly what that means. Maybe the most unsettling part of all this is realizing the story was never locked away. It was just hidden. And that curtain, the one everyone said protected pain, might have been protecting something else, something we didn't want to see, something that still unsettles because it was never said out loud. What we've seen so far weren't proofs or accusations. They were cracks, the fissures in the perfect version, the leaks that time tried to seal but never fully dried. And when we piece together these small fractures, we realize something hard to swallow. The truth might be silent, but it leaves marks. It lingers in the corner of the eye, in the hesitant tone of words, in the questions that never came back answered. And now that we've touched this silence, we can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. My opinion? I think the McCANNS pain is real, but that doesn't mean the story was told in full. It hurts to say this, because no one wants to seem unfair to someone who lost a child. But the truth isn't kind, it's just. And justice doesn't protect feelings. It protects facts. And if facts were omitted, whether out of fear, strategy, or self-preservation, we have the right to ask. Again, with more resolve, with more courage, with less fear of discomfort. The McCANNS silence might never be broken, but the curtain protecting the stage is shifting. And if you felt this with me until now, if this discomfort gripped you at some point in this video, then you're no longer just a viewer. You've become part of this question, part of this gesture of pulling the curtain, even without knowing exactly what will appear on the other side. That's why this channel exists. Reject the versions handed to us on a platter, to give voice to legitimate doubt. And if you felt this video gave you something, a good discomfort, a desire to see with new eyes, or even an unease that made you think, then this is the moment to leave a sign. Something small but symbolic. Down below in the comments, write, "I stand for the truth." Because to me, that phrase isn't a slogan. It's a commitment. It's like saying, I was here, I saw, I felt, and I don't accept the simplified version of things. And if this video touched you deeper, if you think these stories need to keep being told, then the super chat isn't just support, it's a gesture. It's like lighting a lamp on a stage they tried to keep dark. It's saying, don't let this fade. Tell it to the end. Some people send a super chat like tossing a coin into a well. But here, it's different. Here, it's like leaving a folded note at the edge of the curtain so it doesn't close again. That's why those who contribute here aren't just viewers. They're part of the story, because keeping this space alive in a world that loves convenient silence is in itself an act of resistance. And now, tell me, what did all this stir in you? What was the moment you paused, took a deeper breath, and thought, there's something wrong with this story? Write it, even if it's just a line, even if it's just a feeling, but let it be true. I read everything, one by one, because this space is made for those who feel, not just those who watch. And before you go, if this video made sense to you, the next one will touch an even more delicate point. David Payne's visit to apartment 5A and what he never explained. Maybe there lies the question no one had the courage to ask, and that changes everything. So if you felt this journey isn't over, it's because it really isn't. The curtain shifted, but it's still standing. And maybe the next story is the push it needs. We'll see each other there. And until then, remember this: not all silence is forgetting, and not all truths need to shout. Some just need to be heard.